Study Cam, and I want to welcome you to this morning's online Bible study. Whether you're tuning in at Twitter or Periscope at Bible Study Cam, whether you're on Facebook.com/Reflective Bible Study, whether you're on YouTube at The Online Preacher, or even if you're at the onlinepreacher.com/live, wherever you happen to be tuning in, whether it's one of those places or somewhere else, whether this is on live or on replay, I want to welcome you to this morning's online Bible study. And this morning, we're going to be focusing in on a slightly humorous misunderstanding Jesus has with his disciples. But while on the surface it might appear like a misunderstanding, which it was, I believe Jesus intentionally phrased what he said in the specific way so that he could hit two truths rather than one. So with that said, let's read what happens and then unpack what we can learn and apply into our own lives today. And this is Matthew chapter 16. We're going to start in verse 5, and I'm going to read from the New American Standard Bible. And the disciples came to the other side of the sea, but they had forgotten to bring any bread. And Jesus said to them, "Watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Now, leaven is another word for yeast. They began to discuss this among themselves, saying, "He said that because we did not bring any bread." But Jesus, aware of this, said, "You men of little faith, why do you discuss among yourselves that you have no bread? Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000? And how many baskets full did you pick up? Or the 7 loaves of the 4,000, and how many large baskets full you picked up? How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread? But beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." In verse 12, then they understood that he did not say to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now in this passage, in this event, I always chuckle a little bit because the disciples, they forgot bread and they have that on their mind. They might have been pestering each other about it, and Jesus shares with them a metaphor that sounds an awful lot like it could be connected with bread. And so they jump on that train of thought. He's saying that to beware of that because we forgot bread. But the phrase Jesus uses and the phrase Jesus repeats has nothing to do with bread. Except that the misunderstanding is entertaining in a way because the misunderstanding actually allows Jesus to hit on two truths rather than just one. The disciples grumbling about not having any bread, they had forgotten that a lack of bread was no hindrance to Jesus. It would be interesting and kind of humorous or comical to say that the disciples, kind of knowing that in the back of their mind that Jesus had done these things but not really remembering or focusing in on them, it would be like Jesus needing to find simply a crumb, like a stale old crumb in the back of the boat somewhere, and he could multiply that into a fresh 3-piece meal for all of the disciples that were on the boat with him. And it's incredible to think that the disciples would be arguing about not having when not too far in their past, Jesus had done 2 similar but different miracles that multiplied food. But it's interesting because that's just the bonus truth, you could say, that Jesus is trying to share with these disciples. The actual truth that Jesus wanted to draw their attention to is watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Watch out because their teachings, just the evermost slightly sliverest of their teaching, has the risk and the potential of infecting and permeating through and changing the entire whole. Now it's interesting because in our lives we have this saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is kind of a cliche-ish metaphor to say, don't throw out everything when there's something that you want to save or something that's redeemable. But then there's a flip idea, is that a little bit of poison ruins an entire glass of water. Because you wouldn't drink a glass of water if you knew that it had a little bit of poison in it. And we have these two different ideas, cliches you could say, that are beneficial depending upon the circumstance. But when we frame what Jesus is saying here in this passage, it sounds like he's saying a lot more closely to, don't let a little bit of poison infect or spread through your glass of water. Beware of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Beware of the leaven. Beware of that idea, that mentality, that you could say religious framing, because it has the potential and risk of infecting the entire movement. And it's fascinating because when you look out at the world today, there is no shortage of Christians with a various range of ideas. And some of those ideas might look very similar to Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees, you could say, are the legalists, and Sadducees, you could say, would be the ultra-traditionalists. They're the people who reject most of the stuff that's, like the Sadducees, they only focused in on Moses' writings as being their scripture. I believe, or at least my understanding is, that they might have looked at the other Old Testament scriptures and said, well, those are good for a historical and maybe a practical and logical context, but they weren't from God in the same way that Moses' scriptures are from God. And so they had elevated Moses' scriptures while kind of pushing aside all of the rest of the Old Testament and scriptures as just being not as relevant or not as important. And we see people like that today, where they will raise up one particular item or one particular issue or one particular set of doctrines or theology and push all of the rest of that aside. And Jesus challenges his followers to not be legalistic and hypocritical, you could say, like the Pharisees were. And he also challenges them to not be like the Sadducees and elevate some things that they, like their preference, above all of the others. Now, I'm not saying that Jesus' challenge here and his warning here is easy. Because if it would be easy, there probably wouldn't be any reason for Jesus to share this message. If it was common sense, then there would be no reason for Jesus to challenge his disciples with this. But as I look out in the world today, I believe this challenge is one that is incredibly relevant for anyone who calls themselves a follower of Jesus. Because as we look out in the world today, let's choose love over legalism. And let's be inclusive rather than exclusive. And this isn't inclusive saying, hey, what you're doing is okay. No, this is being inclusive saying, I have no problem spending time associating with you, being with you, regardless of anything about you that other people might say should separate us. Inclusive, loving the sinners, because all of us are sinners, But loving the sinner doesn't mean loving the sin. In loving the sinner and in spending time with the sinner doesn't mean that their sin is going to rub off on you. That was the Pharisees and the Sadducees' big gripe with Jesus, is that he hung out with people who were clearly sinners. And while we could humorously step back and say, well, Jesus coming to this planet would mean that he would be associating with nobody who wasn't a sinner, the Pharisees and the Sadducees' gripe with Jesus is that it was like he went and spent time with people who didn't care that they had sinned or were actively sinning. And that's because Jesus came with one goal of sharing God's love with those people who needed God's love. And as I look out in the world today, I believe that there are people today in this world, perhaps even a lot of people, who truly need God's love. And so with that said, as we spend a few minutes this morning focusing in on the Bible and on this passage, let's let Jesus' love shine through us and push away all of that legalism, all of that hypocrisy, all of that bias, you could say. You could say that the Sadducees have bias. Push all of that away as best as you can, and the parts that you can't, ask God to help you with, so that you can show his love to those he brings into your life. And so thank you for tuning in, whether you're tuning in at Twitter, Periscope, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you happen to be tuning in. Thank you for tuning in. And if I've shared something or missed sharing something in this passage that you want to thank me or draw my attention to or just comment on, then jump into any one of the comment boxes and let me know. If you're on Periscope, you can jump in, I'll be able to see the comment, but I probably won't be able to respond because that comment stream will end as soon as this live stream ends. But whether you're on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or somewhere else that you see this video, jump in and comment. And when I see it, as I periodically check it throughout the day, I will jump in and interact with you. And if this video and this message and this idea challenges you, or if this idea is something that you know somebody else in your life needs to hear, then I would encourage you to share this video with them. Because while we're separated physically through distance and social distancing and keeping 6 feet or more or less away, something along those lines, depending upon where you live and the suggestions of that place, let's stay connected digitally and keep our hearts and our minds and our focus and our faith on Jesus, asking him for his help to show God's love to the world around us. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow.